Hello and welcome to the I Can Do podcast with Benjamin Lee. We're here to talk about tips and strategies to have an I Can Do mindset. Life is what you put into it. Get the most you can. Here's your host, Benjamin Lee.
Happy New Year, 2026. I hope and pray all is well with you. We are moving forward with the I Can Do podcast. It's been an amazing journey starting back in 2019 in November, and we have just kept on going. I have overcome fear. I have asked people to be on the show. They've said yes. I've had people who have said no, but the journey continues, and what an amazing journey it's been. One of the big things I want to share with you before I dive into my main topic for today, give it a shot. Try it out. You know, sometimes we can talk ourselves out of doing certain things. Well, I don't know how this is going to work. What about this? You're never going to know unless you try it. And that really leads me into what I want to talk about today. Saturdays, I want to share some insights with you. I want to share some things that I have learned over the past 5 years. I've been in public speaking in some shape or form, it feels like my entire life. Growing up, I was actually really shy. It took me a long time to get comfortable talking to people. But once I did, I actually had a hard time stopping. In fact, my English teacher, I believe it was Mr. Nelson at Urbana High School, if he's listening, if you're still listening, or if you're around, please let me know. He said one day, I was talking in class, and he said, you know, Ben, when you first came into my class, some reason I got transferred into it. He said, you hardly said a word. But then he said, now you just won't shut up. Please be quiet. And that's how it typically was for me. For a long time, I would be shy, and it'd take me a long time to kind of warm up. Maybe you can relate to that as well. I worked at Walgreens in high school. I worked at a Gold's Gym. I worked at the front desk. So I was forced to talk to people. I worked with Pfizer Pharmaceuticals for a span of 8 years. From 2001 to 2009, I was forced to talk to people. In fact, one of the things that they did in the training department, when we would go out to White Plains, New York, the hotel and the training facility were right next door. Some of the trainers would have badges that would represent them, make them doctors. And so part of the things that we would have to do on a daily and weekly basis, we would have to walk up to them during the day. It could be at any time during the day. We would have to initiate a conversation, initiate questions, get feedback to really get us comfortable going out and then doing that with physicians and the medical staffs that we would interact with in offices and also in the hospitals. That took a lot of courage. We also were recording. We were recorded with respect to our presentations. And I can remember one time I totally bombed it. I think I still have that VHS tape. It was awful. And so, you know, you have all of these experiences. I've had these experiences for a long time with speaking. For the past 15 years, I've been preaching on a full-time basis. And even before that, when I was still in pharmaceutical sales, I was filling in, teaching Bible classes, preaching occasionally. My very first sermon in Rockford, Illinois, it was called One More Night with the Frogs. I had no idea what to do with respect to putting a sermon together. There is a preacher named Brother Leroy Butler. He may hear this. I do apologize, Brother Leroy, but he wrote that sermon, One More Night with the Frogs. I heard it. I listened to it numerous times. I preached it word for word. Almost. That's what it felt like. And I have the tape still. This is like in 2001. And I listened to the tape not long ago. It was absolutely awful. But nonetheless, I did it. And like 4, 5, 6 months later, Leroy Butler came to our congregation to preach for a week. And I was scared to death because I was thinking, I'm going to be exposed. I took his sermon, didn't give him credit either, which you should do. But I went every night, and he never preached that sermon, One More Night with the Frogs. And if you're interested in that sermon, let me know. I could tell you more about that. So I've been in some speaking forum environment for a long time. I signed up for Toastmasters when I was in Columbia, Missouri. There was one moment where I had the opportunity with another Toastmaster to go on a local TV show to talk about Toastmasters and what it is, what it was. That was a really cool experience. Yet there's still moments where speaking throughout the years, it can be nerve wracking, it can be terrifying, it can be paralyzing, and maybe you can relate to that. And so I want to share with you today and moving forward on Saturdays. I'm calling Saturday's episode Saturday Sideline Coaching because I really am a coach in many respects. I have a second young man in a preacher development program that, in a sense, that's mentorship and coaching. I'm a certified life coach. I've done that. That's coaching as well. And I'm also an Ultraspeaking certified Ultraspeaking coach as well. And that's what I want to share with you. I want to share a journey that really started back in 2020 for me because I'm constantly looking to see how can I improve. And so there's a book that I would recommend. If you have listened to these podcasts, Tuesday is typically Tuesday's Takeaway, where I share different insights on books that I'm reading or have read. I have over 1,300 books in my library, and I love books. I think we need to double down on books. Here's a book called Ultra Learning. Let me just sit here for a second. It's called Ultra Learning by Scott Young. The foreword is actually by James Clear, author of Atomic Habits. And in this book, I learned about two individuals, Tristan de Montebello and Michael Gendler, who both were in California at the time of this book. And in the process of time, they created a company called Ultraspeaking. And what Scott Young does in this book, he has different case studies. It's a really great book with respect to ultra learning, putting different projects together, and things like that. He really breaks it down with the best possible ways of doing this. And so Tristan, he had um, a motivation of wanting to become good at public speaking. It says on page 42, talking about Tristan, he had given only a handful of speeches in his life, and most of those had been in college. He related to me one example from when he had gone to give a talk to a dozen people at a web design firm in Paris. Tristan says, I cringe every time I think back to that, he explained. I could just tell I was not connecting. There were many pieces where I was boring them. There were jokes where I would laugh because I thought it was funny, but nobody else would. Being a musician, he was surprised how little of it translated to public speaking. Still, it was something in which he saw potential value if he could get good at it. Public speaking is a meta skill, he feels. It's a kind of skill that assists with other skills: confidence, storytelling, writing, creativity, interviewing skills, selling skills. It touches on so many different things. With that in mind, he set to work. So he attended a meeting at Toastmasters International, and there was in attendance at that very first meeting for his public speaking project was Michael Gendler. Gendler was a longtime Toastmaster, and Tristan's combination of charm and obsessive intensity to become good at public speaking convinced him to help coach Tristan throughout his project. And what happened was it was perfect timing for Tristan. On page 43, it says that he had showed up just 10 days before the deadline to be eligible to compete in the World Championship of Public Speaking. And so, what Tristan's going to do, he is going to just be obsessive with practicing, sometimes speaking twice in a day, recording a video of every speech and analyzing it for flaws, asking for feedback every time he gave a speech. His coach Michael would push him far outside of his comfort zone. Once, when faced with a choice between polishing an existing speech and creating a brand new one from scratch, Tristan asked what he should do. Michael's response was to do whichever was scariest for him. And that's exactly what they do. And so his relentless drive pushed Tristan into unusual places. He took improv classes to work on his spontaneous delivery. He learned to trust whatever was in his head and deliver it without hesitation. That kept him from stammering over his words or fearing freezing up on stage. And so he shares his story about just how he would grow. And he eventually became, I believe, the top 10 finalist in a span of 6 months with the Toastmasters contest. Then what happened was eventually friends who heard about Tristan's success started asking him if he could work on their speeches. And so him and Michael saw an opportunity to help others improve their public speaking skills. The demand was intense. Authors who command five-figure speaking fees started to approach the duo to see if they could be taught to improve their public speaking the ultra learning way. Here's what I wrote down on page 45, or here's what I circled. Soon they had landed their first client to the tune of $20,000. And they eventually named their company to Ultraspeaking. It says that the fact that they had attracted such high status clients certainly helped persuade them to make the switch and to coaching public speaking full time. They even decided to name their consultancy Ultraspeaking as a nod to the strategy that made it all possible. Excessive work ethic, getting out of our comfort zones, making $20,000 with one client. That really impressed me when I read this. Tristan going from near zero experience to the finalist for the world championship in 6 months. It is amazing what can be done in a short amount of time. So when I read this, I thought to myself, I wonder what these guys could do for me. So in, I think 17, 18, 19, they had one-on-one sessions and clients in California. I was never able to make it out there. But in 2020, when the pandemic hit, everything changed and they started doing online coaching. That was my opportunity. So in March of 2020, I emailed Michael. I may have joined some of the free classes that they had. Speaking in Your Pajamas, I think was the name of that class. But I reached out to Micah via email, and I wanted to see how can I learn how to speak without notes. So what's interesting is when I think back to Pfizer, for the most part, I spoke without notes. Now, I did have what was called a detail book or detail binder where I could show the physician, here's something here with this particular drug, but it was still speaking one-on-one. There were lunches. I didn't have notes that I could just kind of turn to. I did have clinical trials that I could reference. And I did a public speaking, I did a public talk here at a local bank where I live in 2019, and I spoke without notes. Looking back at some of that, I was speaking really, 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 really fast. And that is what happens a lot for a lot of people, whether you speak with notes or without notes. We want to get through it sometimes and just, hey, let me just hurry up and get through this presentation. And we miss out on feelings, connecting with the audience. That's often the scary part. Another scary part is the pause. In fact, what's interesting on these platforms, even like with Riverside, you can eliminate the pauses. And I know this is a podcast and people want things that are really, really tight, but there's something to be said about breathing and taking our time and using energy. And so this is what Ultraspeaking was teaching people. And so I decided that's going to be my project. How can I learn to speak without notes? So what I did was I took every class I could with Michael and Tristan in March, April, May, in June, and July of 2020. They gave me feedback. The feedback sometimes was really tough. They had created these speaking games to create turbulence, to create that in the moment, because at the end of the day, the best way to get better at speaking is to speak. You can watch YouTube videos, you can have tricks and hacks and all that. Look, at the end of the day, you have to get into the arena, and the arena requires you and I to speak. And so these games would force us to speak on the fly and to take a breath and to use energy and to just be able to create and learn how to create stories and to connect with these different experiences. And so I went through that over and over again. And it was interesting because during COVID, it was almost like the perfect time because there were a few months where I had to record my sermons on my cell phone, where I was in my office talking to my cell phone or preaching to a camera. And then we would upload that for people to watch on Sundays. I can remember one time one of the brothers asked me, he said, "It looks like you were reading notes." And I had not read notes, but I had gone through my notes so many times that it came across that way. So, what I have experienced, I want to share a couple of thoughts with you with this ultra speaking experience, ultra learning project that I created for myself with how to speak without notes. It is interesting what happens because for the longest time, I've always written out my sermons. I've always had some kind of sermon outline. And one of the things that Michael told me was whenever you take your notes up to the pulpit, you're telling your brain, I need these notes. And so that was something that was really scary for me not to have any notes. So one of the transitions that I had made when I first started in my preaching training program in Beaumont, Texas in 2009, what was required of me was to have a two-page outline, single space. It could not be more than 2 pages. Then about a year or 2 years later, I went to 2 pages, space and a half, um, where that now forced me to really condense my words to really get more clear on what it was that I wanted to articulate and to say. And so that's where I was when I had first linked up with Ultraspeaking. And so I did not just take an immediate leap and just stop using any notes. And preaching and public speaking without notes does not mean that you're not practicing, that you're not prepared, that you're not doing your own research. I can remember Matthew McConaughey in one of I guess it was an interview or something like that, in a movie that he was in, School Days. I think that was the name of it. Many years ago, he has that iconic line, all right. What he shared was he had gone through his lines so many times that when it came time to say action, he actually had more flexibility to improvise. That's where that actually came from. So I want to be very clear. If you're looking to speak without notes, that's not a license to not prepare, to not think, to not ponder, to not research. Now, I guess one could get up and just literally speak on the fly. But the reality is, if you're a CEO, if you're a preacher, if you're a consultant, whatever the case may be, if you're a coach, our words do matter. In fact, they matter a lot. So we need to be very careful with this. That we don't want to just kind of like not worry about what we're going to say. But at the same time, the other extreme is we get so stuck with our notes. And I've seen this where people have pages and pages of notes and they still mess up. They still misspeak. And often what can happen is there's a lack of connection with the audience. Sometimes people are looking down, they're not connecting, they're not breathing. And it does feel like they're just kind of reading a script. So for me, in my Ultra Speaking project, it was a process. I would send sermons and they would sometimes review and they would say, look, you're talking a mile and you're talking so fast. And it's hard to let people really digest what you're saying. So I had to learn how to pause and to breathe and to allow myself to be in that moment. And it was a slow but steady progression. With COVID still happening, we eventually started meeting in the parking lot and I would preach from a back of a pickup truck. I would have a podium where I didn't even have a podium. I had my Bible in one hand and a microphone in another hand. I didn't have any room for notes. I think we did have a stand for the microphone, but I didn't have room for notes. So that required me to really know my material. So it was a slow and steady process. And I don't think it was until maybe August that I finally took that leap to try preaching without any notes. And I think it worked out really well. Again, it did not take away from preparation. One of the ways that I would prepare was using time constraints. And this is something that can help you to really articulate what it is that you're going after in a talk. So, for example, you can start off with a 1 minute timer, go to a 3 minute timer, a 5 minute timer, a 7 minute timer, a 10 minute timer, and you can explore what it is that you want to talk about. And the timer, the timing, and that time constraint, you can't get everything in that 1 minute presentation or a 3 minute presentation. But what you can do is really start to crystallize and see what really matters the most. Then you can go backwards, where you go back to 7, 5, 3, 90 seconds, 60 seconds, 30 seconds to really get a clear view of what really matters the most. So that's how I would practice. I would write out sermon outlines, and then I did experiment with not writing sermon outlines. And I will share this, that I did learn and I know how to speak without notes. I'm not looking at any notes right now. If it's a podcast, if it's an impromptu talk, I feel extremely confident because I've been doing this since 2020, 2021, 2022, and beyond. In fact, I had a big presentation at a college in 2022, and that was something that I wanted to work on, giving that presentation without any notes. And I did. I will tell you, I had a lot of fear. And I think a lot of that, looking back, my preparation was not the best. I was not well physically, had a lot of stress and worry about that. And I think I could have done a really better job. I think I also hindered myself because I felt like, well, if I can give this presentation without any notes, that's really like the finish line for me. And that's not the finish line. So I created this finish line that I didn't really need to create. And so that's a lesson that I learned. Now, one of the drawbacks of me preaching without notes is I stopped writing sermon outlines. I'd still read my Bible, I would still prepare, but I did stop writing out sermon outlines, which I think looking back was a mistake. Here's why. My mentor, Max, would always tell me, writing a sermon outline, you are helping your future self 5, 10, 15 years from now. So I have sermon outlines going back to 2009 that I can repurpose, that I can go back if I have a meeting. Hey, what did I say there? What was it that I wanted to get across? When you don't have it written down, it's much harder to identify all of that. And so I believe that's something that that's one regret I do have. Not that it was bad that I learned how to speak without notes, but a lot of those sermons I don't have any outline, and so I have to either listen to them or just totally recreate them. So that is something to think about. A lot of people want to be able to speak without notes for influence, for confidence, to connect more with the audience, and it can be done, and it takes practice, and it takes deliberate practice, very much like with Tristan, becoming really, really obsessed with speaking and getting in the reps. One of the things that I believe confidence is earned. So by that, here's what I mean. Just like with a podcast, the more I record, the more I interview people, the more confidence I get. Now, it may not be the best interview, it may not be the best episode, but the more I record, the way I just keep showing up, I'm slowly building up my confidence. Seth Godin talks about this quite a bit. He blogs every day. He's been blogging for, I think, almost 2 decades now, every day. He's showing up. And so that's building up his confidence. And it doesn't have to be the perfect blog because he's going to do it again tomorrow. He's going to do it again the next day. So there's benefit, I think, in speaking without notes, preaching without notes. There's a brother in the Dallas area, and he's a dynamic speaker, and that's certainly not the end all when it comes to preaching, but he knows how to effectively teach God's word. He doesn't use notes when he goes up there. And he would talk to me about this. Hey, you need to try this. You need to try not speaking with notes. And so eventually I got to that point. point. So let me give you a couple of other tips about this journey that I've observed. And looking back, what I would do. One of the things that I did as well on Saturdays, or maybe it was Sunday morning sometimes, I would take a bath on Sunday morning. I would not try to go through my sermon one last time. One of the things that I observed, when you run through something so many times, it can actually lose like that excitement when that time actually comes. So sometimes I'd go through a sermon 8 or 9 times. And then by the time I would preach it, I would know it pretty well, but at times it'd be a little bit hard to connect. And so that's something that I wanted to really do a little bit differently, where I didn't feel like I just had to constantly run through it. I wanted to still be in the moment and have that opportunity to give myself some room to have that spontaneity. That's another thing that I observed a lot. Thinking back why I wanted to do this, there would be times after I would preach, and all of these thoughts would just flood into my head as soon as I got done preaching. And I would ask myself, why didn't I think about that when I was up there? Why didn't I say that when I was up there? Have you ever felt that way in a talk? Like you get done, you're like, I should have said this, I should have said that. Man, why didn't I do that? We don't allow ourselves to let things settle. We don't allow ourselves to breathe and to stay in the moment for thoughts, for us to access our thoughts. Tristan and Michael talk a lot about our brains being like a butler, that if we allow our brain to work, it will share and serve up these thoughts for us. It will auto-complete like Google. When you type in a Google search, it will find exactly what we want to say. But when we don't allow ourselves to breathe, to pause, to slow down, then we don't give ourselves that moment in the moment to say something maybe even better than what we have prepared. So those are some things that I definitely have learned along the way. It's one of the most fantastic skills I've ever picked up. Michael and Tristan asked me one day, or Michael did, if I wanted to sit in a coaching session. I had never done that before. But remember what I said at the beginning of the podcast, give it a shot. I said yes. And that opened up another door of coaching opportunities, of learning how can I help other people with improving in their public speaking. And that led to being a part of their first cohort programs that they had during COVID, and just meeting so many tremendous people around the world, working with different people, whether it's CEOs, YouTube influencers, entrepreneurs, moms, dads, you name it. Just being able to see people shift and make changes and see their confidence grow because they're willing to raise their hand more, and they're willing to speak more. They're willing to be more aggressive and to share their thought, even if it's not fully prepared or hashed out. It's been an amazing experience these last 5 years. And Ultraspeaking holds a very special place in my heart, along with Michael and Tristan and the rest of the team. In fact, I've had coaches like Ganga, who has been on the I Can Do podcast, and Mark, who's been on the I Can Do podcast, who are also ultra speaking coaches. And so I need to put those links in the bio, and you can go and check them out as well. So to wrap this up, and that's one of the things we talk about using summary prompts. In conclusion, to wrap this up, Saturday sideline coaching, I want to share with you things that I've learned along the way, things that I've shared with hundreds and hundreds of people to help them build their confidence, to grow a little bit more. I have these certifications. I want to use them even more. So, wherever you may be, I'd love to help you. Whether you listen to this podcast, and maybe you want to have a one on one session, I'd love to do that sometime. We can always meet up via Zoom. But the best way to get started is to speak. It doesn't have to be a major moment. It doesn't have to be a TEDx moment. It doesn't have to be on a podcast. It could be raising your hand. It could be saying hello. It could be giving someone a compliment. It could be taking an extra breath before you say something. Every day we speak, and I think there should be a distinction. We try to make a distinction between public speaking and regular speaking. But the reality is, we all speak. So I hope this will help you. Love for you to leave me a rating. If you think this could benefit someone, please share this episode as well. And Lord willing, each Saturday, I want to coach you via this podcast. And it could be that if you want to have some more coaching, you let me know. But I want to share some things that I've learned along the way. Saturday, sideline coaching. I hope and pray you have a fantastic year. Keep going strong. I can do, so can you. Take care and God bless.